Hi everyone, welcome to Deadhouse. Today in this solo bonus video, while Jennifer is still on maternity leave, it is July 31st. I'm fairly certain there's 31 days in July. I might be wrong about that. We all know I don't have the best track record of figuring out how many days there are in a month. That aside, I thought since we were currently doing the Night of Living Dummy books, and we've gone through the first three, it might be interesting as an aside to do some more research and talk a bit more about dolls and specifically ventriloquist dummies and why we tend to find them so creepy. This is going to be a little bit of an information heavy one, and if you hear lots of beeps and other random sounds, I'm very sorry. There's a lot of construction going on my street right now, and I hope it's not too distracting. All right, let's get into it. Like a lot of things, ventriloquism started for religious purposes. The name itself has Latin roots. The meaning for it is to speak from the stomach. The word venter, standing for belly, and loci, standing for speak. In Grecian times, they called it gastromancy, and the idea was that the noises produced by your stomach were thought to be the voices of the unliving. These unliving took up residence in the stomach of the ventriloquist. It was the ventriloquist's job to interpret the noises, and that way they could either speak with the dead or give portents of the future. So basically, unliving meant any kind of spirit or entity that needed to make contact, which is why you could have future premonitions and it wasn't just the dead. One of the earliest known people to use this technique was someone known as Pythia, and they're one of the earliest known because they were one of the first few actually recorded. Pythia was the priestess at the Temple of Apollo in Delphi, and they acted as a conduit for the Delphic oracle. Of course, this was not specific to any one area or even to Grecian times. This was a practice as part of ritual and religion historically, including groups such as the Zulu, the Inuit, which brings it a bit closer to Canada, and the Maori peoples, who were a native Polynesian people. Ventriloquism first started to make the shift from religious purposes to entertainment purposes during traveling fairs that were very common in the early 1700s, so early 18th century. Here's where my art history background came in handy. One of the earliest depictions of a ventriloquist for entertainment purposes using a puppet is done by Sir William Hogarth. In it, he depicts political figure Sir John Purnell in a painting called An Election Entertainment. William Hogarth was very well known for being one of the earliest political satirists. He got to be so well known for that, even though others had existed before him, because he came about around the same time that printed matter was becoming more widely accessible and disseminated. So he became well known for his etchings that often gave commentary on the social or political climate at the time. One of the most famous ones he's known for is A Rake's Progress. There's even a British play, which I have been very fortunate to have seen, based on this series of etchings. Because he did the etchings serialized, each one depicting a different part of the story as it came out, he's also kind of thought of as one of the fathers of comics. During the later half of the 18th century is when ventriloquism really became what we see it as today. It was starting to really cement itself as a popular form of entertainment. The trick with ventriloquism was that most performers threw their voice to make it seem like it was coming from other places in the room or even maybe other people. Not that many used puppets or dolls yet, though they were starting to be well incorporated, as evidenced by the painting done by Hogarth. One of the most famous performers to have done this at that time period was James Byrne. He used a little doll that he kept in his pocket. According to the British Heritage Society, who has made a plaque, I don't know if you're very familiar with those round blue plaques they tend to put on different historical sites, but they have one at a house that Fred Russell stayed in that says, "Fred Russell, the father of ventriloquism, once lived here." He is highly regarded as the man who made mainstream ventriloquism what it is, with a puppet on your lap. He would perform with a cheeky boy dummy known as Coster Joe, and they would engage in banter back and forth. In 1886, he was given a professional, permanent engagement at the Palace Theatre in London. While ventriloquism and ventriloquist puppets and dolls are very different things, you can see from this there was overlap, as a lot of early performers did use dolls before the puppet method became the most mainstream thing. That's how we get some crossover here in fear and what elicits fear and also that sense of creepiness or unease in seeing ventriloquist dummies. The fear of dolls specifically is known as pediophobia. This is classed under a much broader fear of humanoid figures known as automatonophobia. Within that subset is both pediophobia and a fear of puppets called puppophobia. It's thought that dolls are made for one of two main reasons. One is that they traditionally show how children are viewed by adults or how adults wish they were, and they're also used for instructional purposes. And the same is true very much of puppets. They reflect a cultural viewing of society at the time and could often be satirical, think Punch and Judy, that sort of thing. They could be instructional. They were also used for comedy. Dolls and puppets have found their way into popular media for fear purposes for a lot of reasons. It's a very common fear that we have. It's not necessarily pediophobia or puppophobia, but we do get this sense of general unease, and a lot of that is thought to be because of the uncanny valley. If you're not familiar with the uncanny valley, it is the idea that something has become very close to replicating a human and hasn't quite succeeded. So you're on guard about it because it's kind of human-like and you don't really know what to do with it. It seems like it could be real, but you know it's not. It's eliciting part of your flight or fight response. So you're on guard. You're sort of aware of a potential threat and therefore you're uneasy around it. You find it creepy. As dolls and puppets and other automatons became so much more like humanity, they get creepier and creepier as time goes on. While looking this up, I found a very interesting article from the Smithsonian Museum that someone had done based on a doll museum. I will have the link to that particular article as well as some different Wikipedia links and other educational links in the description down below. There was a passage here that I thought was particularly informative because it was the only thing I'd found about the first appearance in media of a creepy doll. So I'm going to quote from the article. The tales of German writer E.T.A. Hoffmann are widely seen as the beginning of the creepy, automaton, and doll genre. Joinsch and Freud used Hoffmann's The Sandman as a case study in the uncanny. The story, published in 1816, involves a traumatized young man who discovers that the object of his affection is in fact a clever wind-up doll, the work of a sinister alchemist who may or may not have murdered the young man's father. It drives him mad. The horror in this story turned on the deceptive attractiveness of the girl, rather than any innate murderousness in her. For the 19th century, creepy doll stories tended to be about the malevolence of the maker rather than the doll itself. So not only did this passage give us sort of the first widely regarded story from 1816, The Sandman, as being the beginning of creepy doll sagas, but I thought there were a few different layers to this. One in particular I wanted to bring up was that if dolls are portrayals of how we view societal members at the time, in this case being, a female wind-up doll, women and young girls, then there's something to be said about the artifice of beauty and how they are viewed as inherent deceptions taught and passed down to women. Since the wind-up doll itself is not inherently malevolent, the deceptions of the female are, which the maker then uses as a tactical advantage to drive the man mad. So there's a lot to really explore in terms of different themes and what was perceived to be societal norms at the time it was published in. Much like the doll was not so much thought to be inherently malevolent, but it was more about the maker than the creation. The same is true of dummies in fiction. The ventriloquist animates them, or gives them life. So the dummy started out as a reflection of the mental state of the ventriloquist, a trend that's still very strong in dummy media to this day. Some really good examples of stories of that is there's an episode of Murder, She Wrote, where a ventriloquist is accused of murder, and he goes around with his sidekick, I want to say it's Billy Boy, and he basically speaks through the dummy because he doesn't have his own voice. And by the end of the episode, he's learned to stand up for himself and have his own voice and not talk as much through his dummy. There's another very weird Mrs. Columbo one, which might be a weird reference for you guys, but I wanted to mention it because it's one that really, really stuck with me from when I saw it as a young child. It was one of the few Mrs. Columbo episodes I actually caught on air during repeats on A&E. And while a lot of the Mrs. Columbo stories are not as well structured as Columbo and they don't hold up as well over time, this story in particular was so chilling and creepy that it really did super stick with me. Rewatching it as an adult, it's very funny and kind of cheesy, but it's got really strong, very visceral, like creepy vibes at the same time. It's about a man who murders his teacher. And of course, the teacher is a ventriloquist professional, and so is this man. This man has become famous in his own right. But because of his mental state, he's upset that his former teacher's dummy was there at the time that he had killed him. He believes that this dummy is a witness and knows what happened. And he goes so far as to try to cut the strings attached to the mouth, so the dummy's vocal cords, so it can't speak and confess. It's really interesting and really twisted, and definitely look it up. Besides being representative of ventriloquist's mental state, there are a number of common dummy tropes. These include a cursed object made from a cursed material, which is a later revelation added to the dummy mythos in Goosebumps. It's mentioned in the reprints specifically that they're both carved from the wood of a coffin belonging to an evil sorcerer. In later stories in the series, it's changed to reveal they were both created by the same evil sorcerer and possessed by some outside entity. And this one relates back to the Uncanny Valley. They're humanoid enough to be thought of as an empty vessel waiting to be given life. While looking into this, I couldn't find an exhaustive list of everywhere dummies have appeared in media or movies. I was really hoping to get like a list of all the TV shows that did dummy specials, or some kind of list of like all the movies that centered around dummies. I did, however, run across certain mentions of particular dummy movies very often. So in no particular order, I thought I'd give you the 5 most mentioned that I came across during my research. The Great Gabbo from 1929, Dead of Night from 1945, Devil Doll from 1964, Magic from 1978, and Dead Silence from 2007. There don't seem to be as many horror films that focus on dummies specifically, but there are a wide range that focus on the idea of a creepy doll. We're not necessarily talking about creepy doll films here, but if we were, one of my personal favorites is Dolls from 1987, and you should totally look that up. That is a weird, wonderful dive. So let's talk about how this relates back to Goosebumps. Slappy is often used to embody a number of common dummy tropes at once. He's used to reflect the conflict between sets of characters, more so than focusing on how he's inherently malevolent. It is, and it's revealed that he is, but it's, particularly in the first 3 books, used to bring out the worst in those around him rather than for his own torturous purposes. He's supposedly made from an evil material. He's also a cursed object, since you have to say a specific phrase to bring him to life. So these are only things that we know about him right now from the first 3 books. It will be interesting to see how his character changes and develops over time throughout the series. I've read a little bit more ahead, but I haven't, done the deep dive yet, and we'll get into that with the rest of the books upcoming in the club. I previously mentioned in the Sci-Fi 2019 recap video, which if you haven't seen, link in the description, go check that out, along with our information panel, which has a lot of information about R.L. Stine based on his autobiography. Slappy is R.L. Stine's favorite villain to write. It's why he's been spawned into so many stories and eventually a series of his own. The inspiration for Slappy comes from a number of places. R.L. Stine has mentioned both from reading Pinocchio as a child, as well as from scaring his brother with a dummy that he owned. Mentioned in his semi-autobiography, It Came From Ohio, was also a deep love of the Twilight Zone and Rod Serling. So it's likely he drew some influence from the episode The Dummy, where a ventriloquist slowly goes mad, believing his dummy is alive and evil, though this has never been confirmed. In the episode, the dummy Willie is used to represent a drinking problem and the ever-growing rift with reality that the ventriloquist Jerry has. It starts with small acts of aggression like his dummy biting him. He's being seen by a psychiatrist who recommends a new dummy. After locking Willie in a trunk, Jerry begins performing with the new dummy and subsequently begins to hear Willie's voice everywhere, though he's the only one that does. In a telltale heart moment, he opens the trunk and destroys the dummy, only to find he's destroyed the new one and Willie is sitting on the couch opposite him. What I noticed about this is that it's very similar to some of the switches with Mr. Wood and the increasing paranoia of both Chris and Amy in the second book, especially Amy with all this talk of her going to see a psychiatrist and her questioning whether or not she's going mad. Though not directly related to the dummy stories, the twist ending of this episode of The Twilight Zone, where the dummy becomes human and the human becomes his dummy, is very similar in style to a lot of the twist cliffhanger endings that R.L. Stine employs in his books. I know this was a more information-based episode, but I do hope you enjoyed taking a little bit more of an explorative look at the brief history of ventriloquist dummies and how Slappy is used and possibly some of his influences in R.L. Stine's books. As always, if you have any bonus video ideas while Jennifer's on maternity leave, please do reach me at a glitter macaroon on Twitter. And if you want to reach Jennifer, she's still here for the ride. You can reach her at coffee_with_Jen with one N, and a glitter macaroon for me is spelt with one T and two U's. Don't forget to hashtag anything with GBC Ghost Next Door, especially if you do know where we can find an exhaustive list of where dummies have appeared in media, or if you want to chat with us about a specific movie or TV show that you may have seen that involved dummies, even a book, even unrelated to the Goosebumps series. Let us know what you think about dummies and dolls and why you find them creepy. Or maybe you don't find them creepy. Let us know. Thanks so much for joining us, and until next time, reader beware, you're in for a scare. I think I eventually did that okay. There were a lot of notes. There was a lot of trying to keep things straight.